Hey guys, welcome to the last of my Build 41 playthrough. In this playthrough I survived many times the massive hordes Knox County would throw at me, but not without incident. In a year filled with fights, zomboids, and exploration, my latest travels brought me to this, a damaged photograph. It pointed to a location. To me, that location looked like Louisville, so that's where we pick up the journey, back in Louisville, where if you'll remember, I had been about as far east as the cemetery. But now I needed to cut a path all the way across Louisville. And all of this on the advice and consent of a torn photograph. But speaking of the torn photograph, what was missing from it would be more significant than what it contained. But I am getting ahead of myself. It was on the 11th of July, just after my 1-year anniversary of surviving, that I began cutting that path to the eastern portion of zomboid-infested Kentucky. And it was about midday when I encountered my first resistance. So after spending the day dealing with that first of many so-called resistances, I would head back to my cozy little steel-reinforced base on a bridge in western Louisville. And of course, because Darren Myaz is a little bit of a night owl, I would be obliged to spend some time futzing around the base and doing chores before I could sleep. But after fixing up the Pontiac a little, I was back on the road where I encountered some fresh resistance in the same spot as before. Now, progress was slow because, to be honest, I was worried about pushing too far while expecting a storm horde any minute, and I didn't want to get caught in no man's land in middle Louisville with 1,000 zombies honing in on my position. So what I did instead was to overeat all these damn avocados I had farmed, and I became an overweight character. Huh, oh well. But anyway, enough with the preamble. Let's just say that on the morning of the 13th, that storm horde began to show itself. And I played it pretty carefully because Louisville was largely untamed and fully controlled by the Zeds. Ultimately, this horde would push me back as far as the hospital, which was, of course, completely gutted by me in the previous year. So, it was a safe place for me to fight and hold my ground. And after that, as I retook ground, I would, of course, litter that same neighborhood war zone with even more corpses. But now that the storm horde was out of the way, I was free to push further into the heart of southern Louisville. And of course, resistance would continue to resist me along the way, and I would, of course, clear out locations to sleep in down the road, so I wasn't required to return to base at night, and I would also, of course, get up to my usual Zed clearing tricks. But by the 15th, I was closing in on my final destination. Now, it was a little bit tricky to clear out the immediate area so that I could sleep here, but clear it out I did, and sleep there I did too. Of course, then the following day I would suffer a little bit of an oopsie as I continued to work my way through the area, and seeing as that oopsie was a neck wound, things really could have gone sideways in a hurry. But at this point in the apocalypse, Darren Myaz was familiar with hardships, and he was well prepared for setbacks of almost every kind. Now, on the 17th, I continued working my way down the outside of this mysterious brick-fenced neighborhood, but I knew I was getting close to my goal now, so the resistance here was pretty heavy. Thankfully, I had access to a gun store where I would lay my sleeping bag for the evenings and wet my beak on fresh supplies. Now, let us just say I would kill far more zombies than I'm showing here, but I can't help showing the biggest explosions on the biggest hordes. You've never seen explosions like these. We have the biggest hordes. Anyways, later that night I pulled up to a mysterious gated property in the middle of the woods, which was beside the mysterious brick-fenced neighborhood, and I spent that evening clearing out the gate guard. But I would have to save assaulting the compound for the following day, seeing as the hour was pretty advanced, and to be clear about it, even though I had a gun store to sleep in, and I had been wiping out massive hordes every day, there simply was more Zeds everywhere, and they were none too pleased about my intrusion into their territory. But all that said, it was on the 19th, 9 days since finding that damaged photograph, we finally gained access to the location it had revealed. And quite the location it was. Now, the Zed presence actually inside the compound was actually relatively light, other than the gate guard from the night before. So, before too long, I had my sweep of the place, but I should mention here that the presence of military Zeds was an ominous sign. And so too were the secret doors hidden behind shelves in the barns, and the mysterious keycards littering the floor of the mansion. And what was a mansion with marble sculptures and tile floors doing out here in the woods anyway? I don't know, I really don't know what it all meant, but the next day we'd be journeying further into the heart of darkness, going beyond the secret door and into a secret tunnel, which to our perhaps naive astonishment was laden with military-grade wares and ammunition of all kinds, almost as if it was preparing me for the trials ahead. But anyway, now we can finally enter the secret underground facility which this whole video is about. There will be many twists and turns and surprises along the way, but at the beginning I entered in through a garage and supply bay with an attached security room and what looked like to be one of many generator depots for powering the underground bunker. But after killing the soldier and scientist Zeds who came forward to challenge me, I went through first an entry checkpoint and decontamination room to see what would be a common and nerve-wracking occurrence down here. A bunch of Zeds banging on an invincible security window. Then, after dealing with them, I would get deeper following these marked floors. There I would find offices and a cafeteria and another checkpoint. But what I came to realize is that this was just scratching the surface. This was merely an entry wing to the underground bunker. I wasn't even really in the thing proper yet. Of course, I would have to deal with another horde latched on to the security window. And the scary thing about those situations is you can't really tell how many Zeds are on it, and if you get too close, you can't be certain about how many are gonna break away and come at you. Anyway, after clearing this one out and looking around the area some more, I decided to retreat to the Humvee and sleep it off for the night. Now, it was a scary prospect, but if I was truly to enter the Labyrinth, I would have to leave my trusty Humvee behind. Anyway, the 21st would turn out to be something of an eye-opener for me. First, I would stumble upon the underground railroad system. This was the first real hint at just how big the bunker I was entering was. I mean, it had its own railroad system, and strangely, there was fuel everywhere, which I would later notice was strapped with C4. The place was rigged to blow. Anyway, up the corridor, I would encounter my first set of blast doors and the government terminals that controlled access to the separate wings of the facility and the secrets contained within. Luckily for me, I already had a full set of keys, which I had been gathering for like the last year of survival. Anyway, all the banging and moaning I could hear through the walls kind of made me a little bit scared to actually use them. But about 11:30 that morning, I would use the L2 key and later the L1 key to get deeper into the bunker. Of course, these would set off alarms, which only deepened my anxiety, but really there was nothing else to do except plunge right in. And I would get into another awkward have to clear Zed stuck on windows and close quarters situation, which after that only revealed a sinister medical testing facility where I could only imagine what those government scientist wackos were getting up to. Honestly, I was getting a Raccoon City vibe down here, a feeling that was only increased once I found out that there were secret tunnels through the ventilation systems in the walls. This was a place with secrets on secrets on secrets. But this still was only the beginning of the labyrinthine maze that was unfolding before me. Anyway, through exploring the vents some, I found myself further up the railroad track. But by now the hour was late and I was very uncomfortable at the prospect of finding somewhere safe to sleep in here, what with the Zeds banging on the walls and secret passageways and total absolute darkness and all. So I would once again retreat to the safety of the Humvee to get a few hours sleep for what would be the last time for quite a while. Then, on the 22nd, I retraced my steps through the various areas I had already been through, looking for anything I might have missed. I was nothing if not thorough, especially when it came to sniffing out secrets. Now, I did find another passage into the southeast I imagined was of some importance because everything had to be of some importance down here, but ultimately I think it was only what it appeared to be, basically just a sewer and storage area, which, in point of fact, also reminded me of Resident Evil and Raccoon City. Now, I did get deeper into the L1 medical wing after that, finding another loading bay chocked to the brim with guns and ammo, but truth is those were absolutely everywhere down here. And after that, my next discovery was about halfway up the railroad line, which was another massive storage depot on either side of the railroad. But feeling I was relatively safe there, I decided to spend my first night in the belly of the beast and not inside my precious Humvee. But now we come to the 23rd and the 24th, when I would stumble upon what I refer to as Central Station. Here, of course, would be many Zeds and many signs of the struggle and the chaos that must have transpired here. But it was an area that was so large and with so many wings that it could actually just shoot guns down here without bringing all holy hell down on myself. And we'll get to the separate wings in due time, but we'll talk about the eastern wing first, which expanded both south and north of the Central Station and actually held some of the most juiciest secrets that were down here. Although it would take some time before those were fully revealed. At first glance, the southern portion appeared to just be an underground hospital, and the Central Station portion of it outside appeared to just be a quarantine and overflow zone, which would, ironically enough, become the location of my base for my stay down here. Anyway, on the 25th, I began penetrating the hospital, only to reveal passageways which would lead me north, both a long ground-level passageway, but also a sky bridge, which I discovered was blown out in the middle. Whatever was across from there, they clearly did not want me to find. So, I was left with working my way across the passageway on the ground level. And on the other side, I would of course encounter so many Zeds banging on so many windows that the game sound was on the verge of breaking, and so too was my sanity. But after clearing the Zeds and clearing my sanity, I would see that the Labyrinth was only getting even more elaborate from there. And I was relieved to find out I could get outdoors, so my transition to a basement-dwelling mole person was not inevitable after all. Now, mapping out all of this underground bunker was nearly impossible, but as you can see, I was doing my best, and maybe you can begin to appreciate the sheer scope of this underground facility. Anyway, in another scary holding room, I would of course find yet another scary secret entrance to yet another scary secret tunnel. But I felt that was enough excitement for the night, so I decided to visit the library and bring back some reading material to my new home. Now, at this point, you might be wondering the same thing that I was. What would happen if a storm horde came after me down here? I myself was somewhat worried about getting trapped and cornered, but on the other hand, I reasoned that that was unlikely, because the underground facility was enormous, and the fact that it was very compartmentalized meant that for any Zed trying to get to me, I imagined they had a very, very long path to get there. Still, the Zed population already inside was nothing to scoff at and proposed a very legitimate threat on its own, storm hordes or not. And the fact is that somewhere in this section of tape, a storm horde did come after me, but it didn't seem to matter. I was okay. Anyway, on the 26th, I investigated the next wing of Central Station, which turned out to be what looked like a civilian living quarter. Of course, Zeds constantly harassed me down there, and I would find probably the scariest window-banging horde of them all, but this western wing of the complex appeared mainly to be a residential area. It had rooms and dormitories, cafeterias, a pool, locker rooms, entertainment rooms, even an armory, and a laundry. It also had its own secret ventilation passageways as well, as every wing of the facility would have come to find out. These were places I imagine survivors took refuge, but also a place I imagine that the outbreak leaked through, but who knows. Now, for the second half of the 26th, I used the L2 key to get into the next wing, which turned out to be a very large garage with more goods and supplies and Zeds, which also opened up to the great outdoors as well. And over the sounds of silenced gunfire, I could hear the birds tweeting and squawking. In this great hall, it was evident from the charred corpses and explosions that an attempted quarantine had failed here. But in the control room of the second floor, I made an important discovery I wouldn't fully understand until later. These red shafts would give me what can only be described as sheet rope vibes. I would, in retrospect, turn out to be correct about that, but the problem would always be a question of what was above or beneath these makeshift ladders. Make a wrong guess and guess what? You're dead. Anyway, being the thorough, busy little bee that I am, I spent the rest of the night investigating the area and combing through more secret passageways. But the biggest secrets down here would, for the time being, continue to elude me. Now, as you might imagine, at this point I was kind of getting comfortable down here and beginning to feel as if I knew what it was all about. But then, the next couple of days would happen, when I'd get deeper into the scary, scary ventilation system. First, I entered a new passageway through the big garage and saw a group of Zeds inside. But I kept going until I came to a wall that I was unable to break with the sledgehammer. So I doubled back until I found my way behind that gigantic window horde in the barracks that was threatening to break the game. I decided that I really needed to kill them in order to save the game from crashing. It was just scary to turn the corner on them. But anyway, on the 28th, the mysteries would deepen as I did find another red sheet rope ladder behind these screens, and then another batch of window-obsessed Zeds. Just what in the hell had happened down here? Then I broke another wall, revealing the outer wall of the bunker, and this area here definitely reminded me of Resident Evil 2, and eating all those silly green herbs to restore my health. Anyway, it was time to take a leap of faith and climb up one of these red sheet ropes. To say it was a bit frightening up in these new vents would be a little bit of an understatement. And when I saw this wall marked L5, I was pretty sure I was getting somewhere. Then I followed a long passageway and happened to have a wee bit of an incident. But luckily for me, all my many leather patches finally protected me. In all honesty, I was scared out of my mind now continuing to go through here. The incident really reminded me that I had no idea what was lurking around every corner. I didn't know if I would get trapped and cornered, or where the Zeds would really be approaching from. Would my escape routes get cut off? Would I even remember my way out? Then I would get into a little bit of a pickle in this specific corridor. The Zeds, they just kept coming. And it started to get late, and I started to run low on supplies. And the Zeds really showed no signs of relenting. Eventually, I did make a break for it and was relieved that my escape route was still clear, relatively. Now, truth be told, I happened to get a little lost on my way back, but I found even more secret passages, and more importantly, the connections between them. And at the time, I didn't know it yet, but I was within spitting distance of some of the most important secrets contained here. But for the time, I was just circling the drain. Before the night was over though, I'd map out the various paths that led to the various important intersections I'd need to get to in the future. Then the next day, I'd investigate the garage I had viewed from the tunnels above and find an all-important set of wheels, a fresh Humvee. I was underground, but I was once again mobile, thank God, and able to take advantage of the roads down there. And then I would even find a generator and get it up and running. Now, my descent into mole-personness would be slowed down even more. Although unfortunately, the generator didn't actually reach my sleeping quarters. And I suppose at this point, generator notwithstanding, nothing was slowing down my mental decline. Now, as you might imagine, I was running through ammo like an out-of-work actress runs through Percocets. So the next 2 days became resupply days. Thankfully, supplies were almost everywhere. I had water, I had guns, I had ammunition, I even had a working vehicle, and now I had electricity. I just needed to get that electricity to actually reach the location of my base. Anyway, on the 1st of August, I realized I was now in a fairly self-contained and safe area, as it was sealed by a fresh set of blast doors, and I had killed probably every Zed in my vicinity. Well, maybe not every Zed, but most of them. Now, on the other side of the railroad tracks, they weren't sealed by blast doors, but they were still sealed by a collapsed tunnel. The silver lining. You gotta look on the bright side. Anyway, it was time to work my way into the mysterious central building with the collapsed sky bridge. Here there were signs of a struggle, and there was another one of those infamous window-obsessed hordes crowd controlling themselves. But even though they were contained, they did terrors to my anxiety, and it was necessary to kill them so that I could think straight. Upon further investigation of this L4 lab, I would, of course, find plenty of vaccine material and ammonia, which was the bane of my existence for almost the entirety of the previous year. But I made an important discovery there that night. Vaccines. Vaccines of all levels, including the level 4 full cure vaccine. Now, if you've been following the series, I had been crafting my own vaccines and saved myself on multiple occasions, but despite my best efforts, crafting the level 4 vaccine remained beyond my skill level. But now, I had found one, which meant I was good for at least one more bite. Man, what a long, strange trip it's been in Foreman's basement. Anyway, on the second, I continued mapping out the secret tunnels of the vents, and then I made a shortcut of my own, which would help fast track me to the level 5 area. There were so many secret and hidden passageways and red sheet rope things back here. I'm not sure that I did ever fully find and explore all of them, but I did my best. Now on the third, I would follow the directions to the L5 area and find an ominous cargo elevator and windows that led to the outside. This may well have been the single vector through which the virus actually escaped into the wider world. Thanks, Obama. Anyway, at the bottom of this nasty little staircase, I found the L5 terminal, which led into another, even more secret railroad and loading dock. And following the rail to its terminus, I came upon what in other circumstances would look like a nondescript office building, only it happened to have glassed doors. In retrospect, it kind of reminded me of the CDC building from The Walking Dead Season 1. But also, I have to say, it was more strongly than ever giving me those uncouth Raccoon City vibes. And was I scared out of my mind? Yeah, I guess you could say I was. And then the scary loud music really didn't help either. Nor did the Zeds I could hear banging on the far sides of walls. I was supremely worried about what would happen if these doors should come open. And I guess you could say that from my very first steps inside here, it seemed to me as if I was walking into a trap. So I poked around a bit, as was my custom, and I didn't fully commit. No, instead I headed back. Then, on the 4th, I opened the blast doors to the north of Central Station, only to reveal what I referred to as a second, smaller Central Station. Although, in fact, this Central Station wasn't smaller, nor was its Zed population. And I would spend most of that day fighting against them for an entrance into this area. Anyway, the next day after that, I'd fight into it some more and begin my first cursory investigations into the place. But the truth is, the labyrinth here was greater in scale than I could have even imagined. And I've got a bit of secrets fatigue, so let's take a break and spend some time back at base. During this break, I finally established the solution to my electricity needs, at least for my actual sleeping quarters. I decided to break a wall into the outside nearby, now that it was clear and safe, and not only did I get electricity to my room, but I also got a little garden started as well. And with all that I had been through recently, I couldn't help but lean into an extended vacation. So I spent the next couple of days working on the garden, cleaning up and organizing the base, and replenishing my ammo supplies once again. Now, it was about this time I have to say that food became an issue. That was perhaps the one type of thing, of all the things, that was actually quite scarce down here. Now, I did get those crops planted, But if we're being real, it was going to take some time before I would be able to reap what I sowed. And in the meantime, I was heading towards becoming underweight. So for me, it was all random bottles of booze and whatever tins of sardines I could scrounge up until I could find something more. Now on the 10th, though, it was time once again to head back into the breach. Of course, by now, I was beginning to see how all the elaborate winding maze secret tunnels looped back and fed into each other, which saved me time when it came to commuting back and forth. But the next thing to do now, simply put, was to clear out the second central station. Now, it didn't look like much at first glance, but on the inside it was deeper and taller than I had thought possible. So, after entering through a cafeteria, I went through what looked like some sort of government education center. Then, of course, I came into the more sinister testing and observation center, which was about 4 floors tall. Evidently, the test subjects had managed to break out of their cells. After that grisly discovery, I wandered through even bigger labs than I had previously seen. This was clearly the very epicenter of all their misbegotten experiments, and it was truly endless up here. So endless, in fact, I was getting a little disgusted with all of my discoveries, and it would get late before I could finish discovering the area. So I had to head back to base. Now, like I said, I was getting hungry, so I thought I might as well try trapping some animals in my new yard, though that would never come to fruition. Anyway, it was time to lay down and ponder the absolute depravity of the government and those nutcase scientists who would seemingly do anything they were told. Now, on the 12th, I continued pushing and finding more secrets and more disgusting labs and more hidden passageways and more signs of inevitable struggle and experiments gone wrong. It was sickening. And then I found a very far, very out of the way, and I think like 6 stories up passageway that led me to some odd 4-way storage floor that contained a little bit of everything. Apparently, the government had squirreled away all the wealth it could muster, both in fiat currency and, more importantly, in gold, for after the apocalypse. A little more important to me than that, though, would be the food I found up there. That's what I really needed at this point, and it saved me from the starvation path I was headed down. And after all of that, I headed back and continued making even more connections between the secret tunnels and passageways I had explored before. And I made it into the absolute basements of the complex, which housed even more holding cells and seemed to be reserved for the animal testing that had gone on here. But that being all said and done, this extraordinarily massive wing of the secret government bunker still was not done. So on the 15th, I would crawl my way through even more secret labs. But let's move on, I've had enough of that. On the 16th, I continued to follow the road north and found the next point of interest, and answered finally that one ineffable fucking riddle. Where's Waldo? Why, he's conspiring with the government in an undisclosed government bunker underground, of course. And to give you now a more complete idea once again of just how large this bunker was, let's look at the map. Yeah. And so it would come to pass that after nearly 30 days down here, I had spanned the entire length of the bunker from hidden entrance to slightly less hidden but no less guarded entrance south to north. Here there was, of course, more evidence of struggle, failed signs of containment, tossed offices, and plenty of mind-numbing Zeds who I dispatched with prejudice because the fact is, they were the ones who created this mess to begin with. They would find no sympathy here. Anyway, I did spend the 18th exploring more of the outside, and there would of course be more warehouses with even more supplies, including metalworking supplies, which I had been looking for so I could pimp out the Humvee. And then there would be another hospital and a helipad, but the most important thing out here was that I now had an exfiltration route, and I began to plan my escape. The first problem with all of that, though, was that I had not fully cleared the underground bunker. I knew that I had. The L5 area deep within was still unexplored. The second problem would, of course, come late at night on the 21st. That little thing called a storm horde, which a month underground had almost made me forget about, they would, of course, break through the eastern fence and challenge me there. But after dealing with them, I found out elsewhere they didn't quite have the manpower to get through the fences. Unlucky. Anyway, after mapping the outdoor area and securing my escape route, which really was no easy feat. I mean, despite how fast we're combing through the footage here, I have to say this whole experience was a gigantic effort start to finish, and also a nerve-wracking one for the majority of it. And of course, when I would get comfortable and maybe overconfident, things would start to go awry. So yeah, I was kind of feeling lucky to still be alive at this point. Anyway, by the afternoon of the 24th, about a week since I first hit daylight on the north end of the secret government bunker, I had once again finally set foot on natural, civilized, regular Zed country. Now, this northern entrance happened to be directly across from the Louisville Music Festival of all places. So you can imagine how the outbreak actually transpired here. But anyway, like I said, my job was not done. So after hitting a quick resupply, I sent myself back down into the belly of the beast. The good news is I had managed at this point to maintain my weight at a healthy 78, and my crops were actually looking to come in soon. Then over the course of the next couple of days, I would head down into the depths of the L5 area, transporting guns, food, and ammunition, and making exploratory incursions deeper and deeper into that area. Funnily enough, I didn't actually need to bring water because some of the crates down here were actually water containers. So first things first, I went deep into the underground area, and my investigations into it revealed a dubious server room and an even more dubious L0 terminal. From that first encounter with the L0 terminal, I was 100% certain that if I activated it, those doors on the main floor would open up and a bunch of zombies would flood out. So, true to form, I didn't activate it at first. Instead, I continued vetting the area. But I would just find more secret passageways and sewers and hungry Zeds. To say it was scary down here is an understatement. But let's just get on with it. On the 28th, I finally bit the bullet and activated that terminal. Immediately, an alarm started going off. So I made a run for it back to topside, and I was right, it was totally a trap. But my weaponry was pretty good, as you probably have noticed by now. Even so, I still had to worry about getting trapped. So I took my opening and ran through. Once I got to the other side, I would fight my way back through to clear out the Zeds, now that I felt more safe about it. In the process, I would of course cover every square inch of wall and carpet in blood and corpses. Now, after sleeping off the events of the day previous in my little crate box home away from home, it was time to close out this account. Now, the areas behind the blast doors would be, of course, more labs and offices and cafeterias. And beyond all of that would be another massive basement and more secret passageways, gate kept by more Zeds. But I would find a clever way to deal with them. Now, this particular secret passageway would lead to a heavily locked down lab that had a flooded out bottom floor. And it was a place rampant, of course, with medical supplies and vaccine material. My greatest discovery, though, would come inside the refrigerators along the northern wall. Here was more evidence of their human experiments, and here I would find both zomboxicillin and zomboxavir, which were heavy-duty cures. Now, being the thoroughgoing explorer that I am, I would of course continue searching the lab and the rest of the area. But mostly I just found more supplies and more passageways that interconnected with one another. Like this one that dropped into the kitchens of the cafeteria, which was part of the trap. If I had dropped in here before activating the L0 terminal, I would have been completely fucked. The only way out would have required me to have my sledgehammer on me and to bust through a wall while fighting off the 1,000 Zeds that were inside there. But that's not what happened, and at this point, the L0 area was officially clear. And in point of fact, the entire secret underground government bunker was clear. I had uncovered it all. The evidence of a vast government conspiracy, human and animal for that matter, genomic testing. Evidence, obviously, of that testing gone awry, and the likely vectors and ground zero of the outbreak, which escaped from the facility through prisoners escaping through their cells and escaping through vulnerabilities in the building's infrastructure. Attempts at concealment and quarantine failed. Chaos ensued. But through it all, the government had actually succeeded in one very important thing. They had successfully synthesized the cure for the virus, and conveniently left it where I could find it. And now, Darren my ass is good for at least 2 more bites. Great job, guys. Now, I could go on here about how it took me at least a week to pack up and leave the bunker, and how I loaded to the absolute gills a mega trailer with over 100 pounds of ammunition, or how about a month later I believe I pulled up onto the outskirts of Chinatown. But at this point, we've achieved our mission, detailing the events beneath the surface of the government bunker. And it was just after this point in the playthrough that Build 42 released, and the rest is kind of history. Anyway, now we're done, so it's time for me to get out of here. But before I go, I'm gonna sneak in a quick thanks to my channel members, Santiago Flo and Gamer Okami. Thank you guys for continuing to support the channel. But now that that's said, I'm gonna get out of here. All right, peace.